orderly way and keeps track of who is coming and going, we're going to keep having major problems. Why not give amnesty to illegal immigrants who are already here? We let them in, so now we ought to let them stay. Some of these people have spent decades building lives here. It would be heartless to make them leave now. We're supposed to be a nation of immigrants. We can't deport 12 million people. These are some arguments made in support of granting amnesty to people already here illegally. Feelings run high on this issue. People's futures are at stake, and it touches the question of what this country stands for. Of course, many other Americans believe it's not right or smart to say, "Okay, you're here, so you can just stay." That amounts to rewarding people who have broken the law. Granting amnesty also sends a message abroad. Come in illegally, and eventually you'll get permission to stay. We learned that lesson after 1986, when Congress passed a law offering amnesty to millions. It ended up encouraging more illegal immigration. Granting amnesty is a slap in the face to immigrants who have waited in line for years and have gone through the formal process to come here legally. It undermines the idea that laws actually mean something and that this nation's borders are sovereign. Everyone recognizes that locating and deporting 12 million people would be extremely difficult, to say the least. It's not a prospect that anyone relishes. Some reformers support the idea of a path to citizenship that would require people here illegally to pay fines and back taxes, learn English, and meet other conditions to earn the right to stay. Others argue that would give people who have broken the law one of the most sought-after privileges in the world, U.S. citizenship. The issue has huge political ramifications. Many Democratic lawmakers are, frankly, cynical in their calculations. They want to award citizenship to millions of illegal immigrants because they believe most would end up voting for Democrats. As the debates continue, conservatives will look to uphold a handful of principles. We need to get control of our borders. We need a clear set of immigration laws, and people need to stick to them. That includes people who have come here illegally. They need to get right with the law. And for anyone who wants citizenship, priority should go to immigrants who have come here legally and patiently followed the rules. Why do many conservatives want immigrants to learn English and become American? Because if they don't, this country could end up falling apart. Over the years, the United States has done a good job of assimilating immigrants. In other words, Americanizing them so they become part of our national family. That doesn't mean immigrants have to lose their heritage, whether it be Mexican, English, or Nigerian. It means coming to share ideals at the core of being American, principles like freedom of thought and speech, equality before the law, and the right to worship God as we please. Those ideals make us all one people, no matter where we or our ancestors came from. They're the reason we have the Latin motto you see on every dollar bill and coin, E pluribus unum, out of many, one. Abraham Lincoln pointed out that American immigrants are heirs to the principles of the Declaration of Independence and other founding documents. The moral sentiment of 1776 is theirs to claim. They have a right to claim it as though they were blood of the blood and flesh of the men who wrote that declaration, Lincoln said. Is the country doing a good job of assimilating immigrants now? Maybe not as good as it used to. A 2011 survey found that only 1 in 5 Hispanics living here describe themselves as Americans. If immigrants don't come to think of themselves as Americans, this nation will eventually fracture or even dissolve. That's why conservatives believe it's crucial for schools to do a good job of teaching American history and civics. Yet test scores show that many schools don't do a good job of that. Here's something else to think about. We live in a time when Islamic terrorists are recruiting people to do us harm. Their message is, death to America. We don't want immigrants, or anyone else, living here to be open to such messages or to be the carriers of such messages. We have to be realistic. If we want to be free of the hatred and violence that plague other parts of the world, America has to do a good job of assimilating its immigrants. We should want them to think of themselves as fellow citizens, to share our basic values. It's also important for new Americans to learn English. Succeeding in this country without understanding English is difficult, and knowing it is a great asset for job advancement. The English language is part of the glue that holds us together. If we don't share a language, it's hard to share much else. That's just common sense. That doesn't mean that English is better than any other language, or that Americans shouldn't speak second or third languages. That's a wonderful asset for anyone to have. But a basic requirement for any nation to stick together is that its citizens understand each other. For generations, many people coming to these shores have made learning their new homeland's language one of their top goals. Their determination to speak English is part of the fabulous story of the American immigrant. Marijuana. Dear Bill, please note when my son was 15 years old and sneaking marijuana, I knew the destructive behavior and chaos that would ensue. My son is now 27 years old and a hopeless heroin addict living on the streets when he is not in prison. I have prayed and tried everything humanly possible at the cost of utter destruction of my family. Anyone that believes marijuana is harmless is like inviting your wife to have a boyfriend and believing things will be better in your marriage. Common sense is simple. Greg in Michigan, a listener to Bill Bennett's Morning in America national talk radio show. You may know someone like Greg, a father who has had to watch drugs wreck his child's life. It's happening to millions as more and more young people smoke pot. Something almost inexplicable is going on in our country right now. Two trend lines are moving in opposite directions in a way that defies common sense. On the one hand, there's growing enthusiasm about making it legal for people to use marijuana. A handful of states have legalized it for recreational use, and several more for medical use. A 2014 Gallup poll found that almost half of Americans favor legalizing marijuana. That support cuts across political lines. It includes liberals as well as conservatives with strong libertarian streaks who believe they should have the personal freedom to use marijuana and that the government has no business telling them how to enjoy themselves. Here's the stunning thing. While the push for legalization grows, scientific evidence about the dangers of marijuana piles up. The destruction in lives, people like Greg and his family, is piling up too. This chapter explains some facts about marijuana usage and legalization, facts many people apparently don't know or are ignoring. It explores some questions about the limits of individual liberty when it comes to health and public safety. We summarize and agree with the arguments of conservatives who regard marijuana use as dangerous and wrong. Take a look at the evidence, then do your own research. And no, we don't mean by lighting up. For a more in-depth look at this subject, read the article Adverse Health Effects of Marijuana Use by Dr. Nora D. Volkoff and others in the June 5, 2014 issue of the New England Journal of Medicine. Don't just accept the arguments of those who want to legalize without some critical thinking and common sense. They're both much needed because we live in a country where an awful lot of people have decided it's a good idea to legalize a dangerous drug. Isn't pot harmless? It's not addictive like alcohol. There are no bad side effects. It just makes you feel good, that's all. My mom smoked it a lot when she was a kid and it didn't hurt her. You've probably heard statements like those, or perhaps have made them yourself. Before you buy into them, there are some things you ought to know. The first is that marijuana in the United States today is several times stronger than the marijuana people smoked in the 1970s and 1980s. Back then, marijuana was about 3 to 5% tetrahydrocannabinol, THC, the main psychoactive ingredient. The THC levels of today's marijuana average around 13%, but go as high as 20% and above. That means today's pot is a much more powerful drug, and it leads to many more health risks. Marijuana literally alters the structure and function of the brain in young people. The brain of a teenager is still growing. Introducing marijuana into it can actually change its normal development. Regular use affects receptors in the brain that are involved in a host of mental activities, from memory and appetite to pleasure response and pain tolerance. This is permanent, long-term damage to the brain. Regular use may make you permanently dumber. We're not talking about just feeling mellow or goofy while high. We're talking about your ability to think for the rest of your life. Consider this opening line of a story from WebMD about scientific research on how marijuana affects IQ. Cannabis users who start smoking the drug as adolescents show an irreparable decline in IQ, with more persistent use linked to a greater decline, new research shows. One of the researchers says, cessation of cannabis did not restore IQ among teen-onset cannabis users. In other words, once you lose that brain power, you don't ever get it back. Marijuana decreases motivation. Long-term smokers tend to produce less dopamine, a chemical in the brain linked to motivation. Pot slowly robs people of their desire to learn, to grow, to push themselves. When that happens, school grades and job performance suffer. Marijuana smoke harms the lungs. According to the American Lung Association, there are 33 cancer-causing chemicals in marijuana. Marijuana smoke also deposits tar into the lungs. The National Institute on Drug Abuse says that frequent marijuana smokers can develop many of the same problems as cigarette smokers, such as daily cough and phlegm production, more frequent acute chest illness, and a higher risk of lung infection. Marijuana increases the risks of heart problems. Research links usage with potential for cardiovascular disease, including heart attack, cardiac arrhythmia, and stroke, and circulation problems in the arms and legs. There is now compelling evidence on the growing risk of marijuana-associated adverse cardiovascular effects, especially in young people, the lead author of one study says. The short-term impact on judgment, coordination, and motor skills can be deadly. More and more, marijuana is involved in fatal car crashes. Several researchers estimate that a driver has twice the risk of an automobile accident if there is any measurable amount of THC in the bloodstream. Marijuana use increases the risk of mental illness. Those illnesses include psychosis, schizophrenia, anxiety, and depression in adulthood. The link between cannabis and psychosis is quite clear now. It wasn't 10 years ago, says a prominent British neurobiologist. Marijuana users are fond of saying that one reason they like marijuana is that it's not addictive. That's false. While most people who try marijuana will not become addicted, just like most people who drink aren't addicted to alcohol, some users do become dope addicts. According to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, more than 4.4 million Americans aged 12 and older meet the clinical criteria of marijuana dependence or abuse. There is no question that marijuana can be addictive. That argument is over, says a medical expert at the National Institute on Drug Abuse. There's also no question that for some users, marijuana is a gateway drug to even worse narcotics like cocaine and heroin. Not all marijuana users will go on harder drugs, but almost all users of harder drugs started with marijuana. As the brain, especially the teen brain, gets used to the marijuana high, it needs more stimulation to get the same effect. That's when some users turn to the harder drugs. You can bet they started out thinking, marijuana's not going to hurt me. Like it or not, millions of Americans enjoy smoking pot, so doesn't it make sense to just legalize it? The big problem with legalizing marijuana is that more people would end up using it, not less. Is that really what we want? 3 factors have a big influence on drug use, especially youth drug use. The first is acceptability. The more society approves of a behavior, the more young people are apt to do it. Legalizing marijuana puts a stamp of acceptability on it, leading more people to try it. The second factor is availability. The more available any product is, the easier it is to get a hold of, the more people tend to use it. Making it legal to buy marijuana from a shop on Main Street definitely makes it more available. The third factor is cost. As the supply of anything grows, the cost goes down. So as marijuana becomes more available with legalization, the cost drops, leading to more usage. It's not hard to imagine what kind of bad side effects a state is likely to get when pot is legal and easily available. More stoned drivers, more marijuana-related emergency room visits, more crime around places where marijuana is sold, more young people living on the streets. Officials in Colorado, where medical marijuana and recreational marijuana are both legal, say that's exactly what they're seeing. If nothing else, the widespread use of marijuana makes us a less capable people. California Governor Jerry Brown voiced his objections to legalization this way. How many people can get stoned and still have a great state or a great nation? The world's pretty dangerous, very competitive. I think we need to stay alert, if not 24 hours a day, more than some of the potheads might be able to put together. Alcohol and cigarettes are more harmful than marijuana, and they're legal, so why shouldn't marijuana be? This is a common argument. We've legalized two substances more harmful than marijuana, alcohol and cigarettes, so therefore we should legalize marijuana. First of all, it's debatable whether alcohol and cigarettes are really more harmful than marijuana. Yes, drinking can destroy a life, so can cancer from cigarettes. But look again at the list of harms that marijuana can cause. It's a terrible list. This drug damages and destroys a lot of lives too. Cigarettes can harm you over the long term, but marijuana, like alcohol, can harm you right away. People smoke it to get stoned. That loss of focus can mean worse performance at work or on school assignments. It can hurt or kill you while driving. Even if alcohol and cigarettes are more harmful than marijuana, that still doesn't mean we should legalize marijuana. Making one more harmful substance legally available just adds to the problem. It doesn't make any sense to say we should legalize an unhealthy product because something worse is already legal. That's like saying, "My house already has a hole in the roof, and that's worse than a broken window, so now I'm going to break a window." Here's something to think about. One reason many teens use alcohol and tobacco is that those products are legal for adults, which makes them widely available. Teens see adults using them legally, which makes teens want to try them. There's every reason to think that if marijuana is legalized for adults and they use it more openly, it will drive teen usage up. Here's something else to think about. Suppose cigarettes were not legal in the United States, but were available only on the black market. Given all the health risks brought on by cigarettes, cancer, heart attack, stroke, emphysema, chronic bronchitis, would you vote to make them legal? Of course, cigarettes are legal for adults to purchase. There's probably no putting that genie back in the bottle, but that doesn't mean we should let another one out. Knowing all the problems we face with cigarettes and alcohol, does it make sense to make one more dangerous substance legal? It's simply not a good idea. We can add to the list of harmful products legally available in our country, or we can draw a line and say, no more. Shouldn't people have the right to decide what they do to their own bodies? This is a question many libertarians ask. In their view, the government unfairly restricts people's freedom when it starts making laws about their eating or smoking habits. Even if marijuana is harmful, libertarians argue, I'm not hurting anyone but myself, and whether or not I decide to harm myself is my business, not the government's. After all, it's my body. But dangerous drugs cause much harm throughout society, and people who use them cause much harm to others. Once people use mind-altering drugs, they no longer think and act responsibly. That's one reason government makes laws about them. Drug use brings high economic and social costs that affect everyone, not just the drug user. When people under the influence of marijuana commit crimes, it costs the victims. When they have car accidents, they injure or kill others. When they show up stoned for work or don't show up because they're stoned, it costs businesses in lost time and productivity. Drug-related emergency room visits and treatment programs drive up the costs of health care. Addictions to marijuana and other drugs bring terrible emotional costs to family members. If the argument, "it's my body so it should be legal for me to put marijuana in it," is correct, then logic dictates that the same must be true for drugs like cocaine, heroin, and meth. Ask yourself, would the country be a better or worse place if we made those drugs legal to use, buy, and sell? And would legalizing drugs really make people freer? The argument for a right to marijuana really amounts to this: I think I have the right to get stoned. At bottom, it's an argument based on self-gratification. There are much better causes to stand for, and much better ways to have fun. Does marijuana help sick people? Supporters of legalizing marijuana argue that it's useful for treating the pain associated with cancer, HIV, glaucoma, multiple sclerosis, and many other maladies. Some people claim it's good for whatever ails you, from anxiety to arthritis. Several states have passed laws allowing the sale and use of medical marijuana. In most of those states, a note from a doctor allows people to obtain a medical marijuana card. That card allows them to buy marijuana in shops known as dispensaries or clinics. What does the U.S. scientific community have to say about the widespread use of marijuana as a medicine? Major medical associations take a very dim view of the idea, to say the least. The American Medical Association, for example, says that cannabis is a dangerous drug and as such is a public health concern. The American Psychiatric Association says, there is no current scientific evidence that marijuana is in any way beneficial for the treatment of any psychiatric disorder. In contrast, current evidence supports, at minimum, a strong association of cannabis use with the onset of psychiatric disorders. The idea that medical marijuana can be used for a long list of ailments is nowhere accepted in serious scientific literature. So why in the world are medical marijuana shops doing booming business in places like Denver and Los Angeles? In Denver, there are more medical marijuana dispensaries than Starbucks coffee shops, liquor stores, or licensed pharmacies. In Los Angeles, pot stores outnumber Starbucks and McDonald's combined by 2 to 1. In states like Colorado and California, more than 9 out of 10 medical marijuana cardholders list severe pain as the reason they need marijuana. Most of those cardholders are men under age 35. Do you really think all those young men are in severe pain? Here's a clue. Some high schoolers joke that a medical marijuana card is a get-out-of-jail-free card. Everyone knows what's really going on. The vast majority of purchases in marijuana medical dispensaries have nothing to do with medication. They're about people wanting to get high. Some people with cancer, AIDS, or other serious diseases are in great pain and in need of relief. We all want them to have whatever help is available. Programs carefully monitored by doctors who prescribe marijuana for patients with those conditions may help ease real suffering. But laws that make it easy for people to enjoy marijuana under the guise of medical needs aren't what they claim. They're just clever ways to legalize pot and make it widely available. Is the war on drugs worth it? The war on drugs is a decades-long campaign in America to reduce illegal drug use and trafficking. It's a campaign that involves many facets, from catching drug dealers to educating students about the dangers of drugs. Many people who support legalizing marijuana say that the war on drugs is a failure. It has been a huge waste of time and money with few results, they argue. People are going to use drugs no matter what, so why bother? Critics are right about one thing. In the last several years, the war on drugs has done little to reduce drug use, including marijuana. What those critics may not know is that America once made real progress in this fight. In 1979, the United States reached a high watermark of illegal drug use, with over 25 million users. Over 23 million of them were marijuana users. By 1992, we had reduced drug use to the low water mark, 12 million users. We cut the number of drug users by more than half. How did that happen? Simply put, a lot of people focused hard on attacking the problem. Schools sent a strong anti-drug message to students. Government worked hard to stop drugs coming across the borders and put dealers in jail. There were lots of anti-drug TV commercials, and the news media gave intense coverage to the devastation caused by drugs. Movies helped signal that drug use was no longer in. The entire culture sent a strong message that drugs are wrong and mean trouble. But after a while, that message relaxed, and usage went back up. Today, marijuana usage is creeping up to an all-time high. More teens smoke marijuana than tobacco cigarettes. With effort, we could reduce illegal drug use in America just as we have before. Instead, during the last several years, the country has been going the opposite direction. We've seen a major cultural shift in attitudes toward drugs, especially marijuana. Much less attention is paid to the problem today. Marijuana is viewed by many as harmless and even medically beneficial. In the view of many conservatives, abandoning the war on drugs is a tragic mistake. It means surrendering millions of people, especially young people, to less productive, impaired, and possibly disastrous lives. Is using illegal drugs immoral? This may be the most important question to ask about drugs. Unfortunately, it's a question that doesn't get talked about enough these days. Using illegal drugs is obviously wrong in that it's breaking the law, but the question of right and wrong goes much deeper than that. The late political scientist James Q. Wilson summed it up this way: drug use is wrong because it is immoral, and it is immoral because it enslaves the mind and destroys the soul. Drug use is wrong because of what it does to human character. It destroys people's moral sense, and it makes them less than they should be by burning away their sense of responsibility. The whole point of taking illegal drugs, after all, is to suspend reality, at least for a while. That includes suspending moral obligations. People addicted to drugs neglect their duties. The lure can become so strong that they will do nothing else but take drugs. They will neglect everything in life that is important, noble, and worthwhile for the sake of drugs. Drugs make people bad family members and friends. They can make people disappoint and crush those who care about them. People addicted to drugs make bad employees and colleagues because drugs hurt their ability to give their best effort and be dependable. Drugs make people bad citizens by destroying the civic virtues that a free society depends on, virtues like self-reliance, honesty, and individual responsibility. No self-governing society can function when its citizens are in a drug-induced haze. Buying illegal drugs also aids drug cartels, evil people, and enemies of our country. Using drugs neglects and disappoints God. It's no way to treat our bodies, which are His creation. When people forget that this is a moral issue, when they neglect to see right and wrong, they let down their guard, and that's when they get into trouble with drugs. Then, they pay dearly. Race, class, gender, and ethnicity. Conservatives are greedy, hateful, bigoted people who want to take the country backward. That's the cynical drumbeat the left has kept up for decades now. To blacks, liberals have put out the message that conservatives, and Republicans in general, are cold-blooded people who don't care about minorities' rights and liberties. Vice President Joe Biden told African Americans that Republicans are going to put y'all back in chains with their economic policies. Representative Charlie Rangel of New York has said of Republicans, some of them believe that slavery isn't over and that they won the Civil War. To Hispanics, liberals have sent the message that being Hispanic and being Republican don't go together. I don't know how anyone of Hispanic heritage could be a Republican, okay? Senator Harry Reid of Nevada told an audience of mostly Hispanic voters. Do I need to say more? To women, The left has said that conservatives are waging a war on women, trying to take away their rights and put them back in the kitchen. To middle and low-income Americans, liberals have said that conservatives just want to slash taxes for the richest Americans and cut programs for the poor. This is politics of the worst sort. It's the kind that divides people by race, ethnicity, gender, and class. It deliberately tries to set Americans against each other. Conservatives, or Republicans, are the villains, and blacks, Hispanics, women, gays, or any other minorities are the victims. It's the message given to many young people in classrooms around the country, especially in college courses that look at the world through the lens of race, gender, and class. It's also the message in left-slanted news stories, television shows, and movies. Why? Largely for political gain, to build support for liberal policies and big government programs that will supposedly take care of all these victims and protect them from evil conservatives. The charges have been made for so long that many people believe them. It's a fear-mongering drumbeat. It's not good for the country, and it's just plain wrong. Is the United States a racist, oppressive place? America is still a deeply racist country. Legal racism is gone, but it doesn't matter because racism is entrenched in every part of American life. People who oppose President Obama just can't stand the color of his skin. Sometimes you'll hear and read these kinds of statements coming from the left. Conservatives don't buy them. They know their country is a lot better than that. Yes, bigotry and racism still exist among Americans of all colors. Sometimes shameful incidents of racism break into the news, and they're always widely denounced. They're denounced because racist views aren't representative of the country as a whole, of conservatives, liberals, Democrats, or Republicans. Yes, this country has some chapters in its past that include the terrible treatment of some groups. Racism was once widespread throughout white America. Its effects devastated millions of lives. But America today is not the America of 50, 100, or 200 years ago. No other country has done more to secure the rights and liberties of minorities. In today's America, people generally treat each other with respect and fairness, much more so than in many other parts of the world. The vast majority of Americans want nothing but the best for their fellow Americans. That includes conservative Americans. When Democratic researchers studied white conservative Republican voters in Georgia soon after Barack Obama's election, they found that the conservatives' opposition to President Obama had everything to do with his policies and nothing to do with his race. The color of his skin simply was not important. Indeed, was almost beside the point, they concluded. Some young people today have a hard time fathoming the kind of racism they read about in history books. They ask their parents and grandparents, did people really hate each other because of their race? Did they really treat each other that way? That's how far we've come. Is there more work to be done? Absolutely. But we should be proud of the progress made in the last several decades. Condoleezza Rice, an African-American woman from Alabama who served as U.S. Secretary of State, among other high offices, summed it up well. The fact of the matter is, we're not race-blind. Of course we still have racial tensions in the country. But the United States of America has made enormous progress in race relations, and it is the best place on earth to be a minority. To my mind, the great thing about the United States of America is that you can be of any color, any ethnic group, any nationality, any religion, and you can have dreams and aspirations that are your own, and then you can pursue them. That's what this country's about. Barack Obama reaffirmed that point when he was elected the nation's first African-American president in 2008. On the night of his election, he said, "If there is anyone out there who still doubts that America is a place where all things are possible, who still wonders if the dream of our founders is alive in our time, who still questions the power of our democracy, tonight is your answer." Are conservatives against diversity? Of course not, despite what liberals sometimes say or imply. One of the things that makes this such a great country is that it's full of people with ancestries and backgrounds from all over the world. We draw strength from our diversity. As the poet Walt Whitman wrote, "Here is not merely a nation, but a teeming nation of nations." Diversity makes this country a much more interesting place to live. There are few parts of the world outside the United States where you can find restaurants serving Chinese, Italian, Mexican, French, Indian, Thai, and Lebanese food all in one small town. Or hear Irish ballads in a pub one night and jazz rooted in African American music the next. It's all commonplace here. Your heritage is part of who you are. History and traditions matter. That's one of the beliefs central to conservatism. The best traditions of your family and community need to be preserved. The problem comes when we focus on our differences so much that we let them divide us. We begin to think of one another mainly in terms of ethnicity or class, as one of them instead of one of us. As important as race and ethnicity are, they are not the essence of who each of us is. As the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. used to say, it's not the color of our skin, but the content of our character that matters. The real danger comes when people use race, ethnicity, and other differences to turn groups against each other for political gain. That's politics of division, the kind that sends the message, "That group over there wants to do your group harm." Black versus white, men versus women, the rich versus the rest. Diversity becomes not a reason for celebration, but a cause of resentment. The politics of division make people think of themselves as victims who have been oppressed by others. It leads them to think the worst of people who are different. E pluribus unum, one of the mottos on every U.S. coin, is an excellent guide. Out of many, one. Our diversity comes from the pluribus, the many skin colors, backgrounds, and traditions we bring together. That's all to be celebrated. The unum is the crowning part, though, the most important part. In the end, we should think of ourselves as one people. Is affirmative action for blacks and other minorities a good idea? Affirmative action is a policy that dates back to the 1960s in the United States. In its original form, it meant that employers should cast a wide net and seek out qualified minority candidates when hiring. The aim was to end discrimination in hiring and make sure minorities got the same chance at jobs as everyone else. Over time, affirmative action changed into something quite different. It became a policy that requires employers to give a certain percentage of jobs to minorities. It also refers to college admission policies that take race into account when accepting students so that minorities take up a certain percentage of a student body. Affirmative action is sometimes called set-asides, quotas, or preferential treatment. The theory behind preferential treatment is that because of historical discrimination, blacks and other minorities are at a disadvantage when it comes to applying for jobs or getting into college. To erase that disadvantage, standards may be lowered for them. For example, a college might accept black students with lower grades and SAT scores than white or Asian students. The intentions behind this are good, but most conservatives believe that kind of affirmative action is wrong. It tries to remedy past discrimination by setting up a new system of discrimination, one that favors certain groups over others because of skin color, gender, or ethnic background. You don't get rid of discrimination by making discrimination an official policy. The unspoken assumption behind preferential treatment is that minorities can't compete without lower standards. That may have been true several decades ago when they were denied basic rights and decent educations, but it's a terrible assumption to make today. There have been countless examples of minorities achieving success in every field. Preferential treatment by race isn't only demeaning, it's unfair. It brands minorities as less than capable. It causes resentment when some students, who have never discriminated against anyone else, realize it will be harder for them to get into college than somebody else with a favored skin color. It can also be unfair to minorities who get into tough colleges even though they have lower scores and grades. Once they're in, they may find out they're really not prepared. That's setting people up for failure. Too often, they end up dropping out. This country won't work without diversity in its workplaces and on its college campuses. Affirmative action in its original form is a good idea. Employers need to reach out to minority communities, recruit aggressively in them, and encourage their members to apply for jobs. Colleges need to get scholarship money and loans to qualified students from poor families. Most important, all Americans need access to good schools at the K-12 level so they can be well qualified for college and careers. But any system that gives or takes points from people because of their race, gender, or ethnicity is wrong. The way to achieve a colorblind society is to be a colorblind society, in law and spirit. Is the upper class evil? Greedy, unethical, uncaring, destructive. That pretty much sums up the way the left often portrays wealthy people, especially wealthy business people. They take most of the money and leave everybody else scrambling for the crumbs, as one liberal filmmaker put it. Before we start throwing bricks at fellow Americans, here are a few thoughts to keep in mind. First, most affluent people in America got that way through hard work. Their wealth is the product of a system where people are free to succeed. The alternative is government controlling how much people make, with less freedom to succeed. Demonizing any segment of the population is wrong, and that includes demonizing people who have more money than you or I. It's class warfare, and it's ugly because it plays on envy. Here's something to think about. The upper class isn't a fixed group of people in the United States. Americans move up and down the income scale all the time. Nearly 3 out of 4 American adults will spend at least 1 year in the top 20% of income earners. In other words, many high-income earners haven't always earned so much money and may not always do so. They're ordinary Americans like the rest of us, not a special breed that deserves scorn. One problem today is that many people feel like upward mobility is breaking down. For many in the middle and lower classes, wages haven't been rising like they have in the past. People feel like they are treading water financially, if not starting to drown. That's what happens when the economy is weak or the education system doesn't do a good job. Another problem is a widening wealth gap between how much the very rich and everyone else makes. That can cause frustration and bitterness among people struggling to get ahead. But the answer isn't to tear down people who have done well. The answer is to make sure everyone has the opportunity to rise. Chances are good that with hard work and a bit of luck, you'll find yourself doing well financially someday. That's one of the promises of America. If we demonize success, we'll wear down that spirit that has made this country the land of opportunity. How do conservative values help women and minorities? They help the same way they help anyone else. Conservative values apply to all. Conservatives don't look at the world in terms of those values are right for this group, other values are better for that group. The traditional moral values conservatives care deeply about, virtues like personal responsibility, hard work, integrity, faith, are values that make a good life for anyone. The more people put stock in them, the better the country is. Conservatives champion institutions that cross ethnic, gender, and political lines, institutions that benefit all people. Free enterprise, for example, has done more to create jobs and lift people into prosperity than any economic system in history. A strong free enterprise system, coupled with equal opportunities for all, means more success for minorities. One reason conservatives are so concerned about the state of the American family is that success in life is linked to strong, intact families. It doesn't matter what color or class those families are. One reason conservatives have pushed for higher expectations for all students is that they know a good education is the best equalizer. It's why they want minority families in neighborhoods with bad schools to have more choice about where they send their children to school. You can go through life buying into an ideology that views this country as a place where one group is always trying to victimize another. Or you can view it as a place where we celebrate our diversity and draw strength from it. You can see life through a prism that divides people into classes always struggling with each other. Or you can focus on qualities in people that transcend race and class. You can think of the country as a place devoted to group rights based on race, sex, or income. Or you can see it as a place devoted to the idea of protecting the individual rights of every American. It has been said that there are really only two races of people, decent and indecent. That's a much better way to look at the world than obsessing over the color of people's skin or how much money they're making. Part 4. National Defense. The ancient Greek colony of Sybaris was once a flourishing place. Set on Italy's southern coast, it possessed a fine port and rich surrounding countryside. The Sybarites carried on a prosperous trade with cities around the Mediterranean, and over time, they built an immense fortune. The wealthier they became, however, the more time they spent feasting and dreaming up new ways to entertain themselves. One day, a flute player came up with the idea of teaching horses to dance. The Sybarites had one of the finest cavalries in that part of the world, and before long the sound of a pipe set every warhorse in the army prancing away. The entire city would turn out to enjoy the spectacle and dance along with the horses. Nearby lay the town of Croton. For quite a while its people had looked with envy on the rich lands and treasures of Sybaris, and several times had waged war on the Sybarites, but the small Croton army was no match for the Sybarite cavalry. Then a spy reported to the Crotoniates that he had seen the Sybarite horses dancing to a flute. The Crotoniates knew just what to do. They sent their army to attack the Sybarites. At the front marched a company of farmers and shepherds armed with nothing but flutes. The Sybarite cavalry galloped out to meet them, expecting an easy victory, but as soon as the Crotoniate pipes struck up a tune, the Sybarite warhorses began to caper. They waltzed to the music, while the Crotoniate army swept the field, and Sybaris fell. The story, recorded by the ancient writer Athenaeus in the 3rd century, may at first seem like just a quaint old legend, but Athenaeus wrote it down because it contains ageless wisdom. Even in the 21st century, especially in the 21st century, a nation that is in many ways the envy of the world has much to lose if it lets its defenses down. Why does America need such a big, powerful military? The world is full of threats to American security. Islamic terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda and ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria, continue their jihad against the West. Iran, the chief sponsor of terror in the Middle East, is on the verge of becoming a nuclear power. Its government routinely sends crowds into the streets to chant, "Death to America." North Korea is a nuclear power. Its totalitarian dictatorship is ruthless, secretive, and unpredictable. Boko Haram, based in Nigeria, wages terror against all. China's communist government is building up its military and could threaten U.S. allies in Asia. Russian troops rolling into the Crimean Peninsula in 2014 have raised the scepter of Cold War-era Soviet aggression in Europe. Americans have much to lose from such threats in the way of material possessions, but we have something even more precious and vulnerable that needs protecting: freedom. It's a mistake to take it for granted. As the great 19th century statesman Daniel Webster put it, God grants liberty only to those who love it and are always ready to guard and defend it. The founders understood this notion well. That's why in the preamble of the Constitution, they stated that one of the main reasons for establishing a new government was to provide for the common defense. Defense is arguably the first and chief responsibility of the federal government. No other institution is capable of protecting the country from foreign attack. John Jay, one of the nation's most important founders, put it this way: "Among the many objects to which a wise and free people find it necessary to direct their attention, That of providing for their safety seems to be the first. The best way to preserve both our safety and our freedom is to maintain a powerful military to answer threats wherever they may arise, a policy known as peace through strength. The policy does not mean having a large army in order to conquer territory or start wars. It means that maintaining a powerful military discourages enemies from attacking us because we possess the might to overwhelm them. The concept of peace through strength has been around for a long time, no doubt since the days of Sybaris. George Washington, in his first State of the Union message to Congress, said that to be prepared for war is one of the most effectual means of preserving peace. In 1980, when Ronald Reagan accepted the Republican presidential nomination, he reminded us that a strong United States military helps the cause not only of peace, but of freedom. We are not a warlike people, quite the opposite. We always seek to live in peace. We resort to force infrequently and with great reluctance, and only after we have determined that it is absolutely necessary. We are awed, and rightly so, by the forces of destruction at loose in the world in this nuclear era. But neither can we be naive or foolish. 4 times in my lifetime America has gone to war, bleeding the lives of its young men into the sands of beachheads, the fields of Europe, and the jungles and rice paddies of Asia. We know only too well that war comes not when the forces of freedom are strong, but when they are weak. It is then that tyrants are tempted. Reagan used the doctrine of peace through strength to lead the free world during the Cold War. He knew that the Soviet Union could not stand up to the pressure of a U.S. military buildup and a hard stance against totalitarianism. The Soviet Empire collapsed, and tens of millions of people were liberated from the tyranny of communism. Has the U.S. military done more good or harm over time? U.S. foreign policy is soaked in blood. The American war machine is a death machine. The flag stands for jingoism and vengeance and war. These sorts of statements come from far-left critics of the United States, critics abroad and critics here at home. It's not uncommon to run across them on college campuses or in high school classrooms. These critics speak from a deep conviction that American power has done much harm overseas. They often insist that the United States is an imperialist or colonialist power wreaking its evil will on the people of the Third World. Their condemnation represents a profound misreading of history. On balance, the U.S. military is an enormous force for good in the world. During the Revolutionary War, Americans fought to establish the first nation created so people could be free. During the Civil War, the Union Army fought to preserve government by the people and to end American slavery. During World War I, Americans fought in the trenches of Europe to help stop a catastrophe that was engulfing much of the world. During World War II and then the Cold War, the United States led the way in saving the world from catastrophe. A group of European prime ministers and presidents put it this way in a letter published in 2003 in the Wall Street Journal. Thanks in large part to American bravery, generosity, and farsightedness, Europe was set free from the 2 forms of tyranny that devastated our continent in the 20th century: Nazism and communism. In this century, American soldiers have bled in Afghanistan and Iraq to combat terrorism and end brutal regimes that subjugated millions. Over the decades, the U.S. military has launched countless humanitarian and relief efforts, from aiding victims of natural disasters to rescuing ships at sea. America's record is not spotless. There have been times when the U.S. military was used for injustice, such as the forced removal of Native Americans from ancestral lands. And tragedy has come with every war. For example, there have been U.S. drone attacks against terrorists in Afghanistan that, despite the military's best efforts, have killed innocent civilians. But it's important to remember that throughout history, other superpowers have used armies to conquer territory and build empires by force. America, with its unrivaled military, has chosen a different course. The fact is that the United States has liberated more people from tyranny than any other nation in history. If you live in some desperate part of the world with a dictator's boot on your neck and you see a group of men coming over the hill with a flag, you hope and pray it's the American flag. Because the American soldier is a soldier you can be absolutely confident is there to help you. The United States is the greatest defender of freedom in the world. It's a record every American can be proud of. Can we afford to spend so much money on the military? This is a question thoughtful people on both the right and the left are asking. America's staggering debt means that every part of the federal budget, including defense, has to be scrutinized. But if defense spending is cut too deeply, it will endanger our safety. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have been enormously expensive. Military operations have cost taxpayers more than $1.5 trillion. But it's not true, as some on the left like to claim, that defense spending is the main cause of federal debt. As the chart below shows, over the last several decades, defense spending has declined as a percentage of the gross domestic product, while spending on entitlements like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, as well as interest payments on the national debt, has gone up. In 2014, to save money, the Obama administration proposed cutting the Army to its smallest size since before World War II. President Obama's Secretary of Defense stated that, "We are entering an era where American dominance on the seas, in the skies, and in space can no longer be taken for granted." That's an unnerving thought for many around the globe. Here's another sobering thought. China and Russia are both building their militaries as we cut ours. The United States still spends more on defense, but China and Russia clearly aim to close the gap. Not only are China and Russia building their militaries, but they've begun to cooperate with a high level of mutual trust, according to the Chinese Defense Ministry. A Chinese-Russian military alliance is very bad news for freedom. Their combined strength could pose a serious threat. We need to be ready for it. Generally speaking, liberals are less interested in conservatives in spending money on the military. They'd rather devote funds to social programs such as education or welfare. Conservatives answer that if we don't adequately defend ourselves, everything else the government does may be for naught. Yet conservatives, especially fiscal conservatives, recognize that we face hard choices about military spending. This topic will be much debated in coming years. As the debate proceeds, conservatives will remind people that in the ranking of the federal government's responsibilities, protecting our nation is at the top. Shouldn't the United States simply defend its own shores and keep its troops closer to home? Other nations would like us better if we'd scale back our army and stop trying to lead the world. The world would be better off without a military superpower. The United States should stop trying to be the world's policeman. After so many years of fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan, some people think the era of America as leader of the free world needs to end. It's time for our military to stay closer to home, they say. One answer to those arguments is that it's better to fight enemies overseas when necessary than to have them attack us here at home. We learned that painful lesson on September 11, 2001. Another answer is that sooner or later, some other nation, China for example, will become a military superpower. Would the world be better off if China, a nation that has little respect for human rights, had the most powerful military? A third answer is that when freedom doesn't have a champion, aggressors move into the vacuum. For example, when the United States completely withdrew its forces from Iraq in 2011 after fighting so hard there, the brutal terrorist organization ISIS seized large parts of the country. There will always be ruthless people and governments that try to take what they can by force, including other people's liberty. The United States, more than any other nation, has tied itself to the idea of standing up for liberty. The United States can't rush to every trouble spot. We should always be reluctant to send Americans into combat. Such action should come as a last resort. But when forces of evil take hold, they'll keep growing unless a strong force for good stops them. If a serious threat to freedom rises, the United States is the sole global power that can stand up to it. The world is a freer, safer place with a strong America. Sergeant Alvin York, the reluctant hero who left his Tennessee plow during World War I to fight overseas, was asked the question, "What did war get you?" when he got home. He answered this way, "The thing they forget is that